Good evening. Welcome to the American Family Association Presents. Tonight's topic, we're going to be exploring who's stopping school choice in New York and why. Getting your child a quality education is one of the key objectives of any parent. Wealthier parents can send their kids to any school they want to or pick a neighborhood with great public schools. But low and middle income parents can't do this and must send their kids to their local public schools. A public school education in New York now costs over $20,000 per pupil per year, and in Long Island it's $25,000 per pupil, driving our property taxes through the roof. Many states are moving in the direction of providing parental choice in education by allowing parents, especially low and middle income parents, to pick a private or religious school for their child at a cost well below that of our public schools. Most Western nations already do this, but not New York, where overall quality of education is mediocre and our costs are among the highest in the nation. Why won't New York address this issue? Our guest this evening is Frank Russo. Frank serves on the Executive Committee of Long Islanders for Educational Reform. Frank has an engineering degree from Manhattan College and an MBA from Baruch, and is a retiree of Verizon with 7 children and now 34 grandchildren. Welcome, Frank. My co-host tonight is Patty Knapp. Patty?
Thanks, Mike. Frank, this is such a crucial issue today. Why don't we start by just explaining what the term parental choice in education actually means?
Yeah, parental choice in education simply means giving a parent the right to pick any school for their child that's accredited by their state, so it meets all the educational requirements of their state, and to get a fair share of the educational tax money to pay for the cost of that school. And in every state that does it, when we say pay for the cost, it's always half the cost of the public schools student or less than that. They don't give as much money, and I have no problem with that, but it means enabling the parent to pick the school that that parent wants for his or her child, not simply the school they must attend in the neighborhood in which they live. And if you think about it, when you get, you pay into Social Security, you pay Social Security taxes, you get a Social Security check every month when you are eligible age-wise. You can take that money that you've paid into and use it for any purpose you want. You can actually donate it to your church or synagogue. You can donate it to a charity, do what you want with it. Medicare and Medicaid, if you think about it, when you pay into Medicare and Medicaid, you don't pay into Medicaid, actually the state pays for poor people to have their health problems resolved. Medicare you pay into. When you get the payments from the government for Medicare, or you qualify for Medicaid, they don't tell you have to pick a government hospital. You can pick any hospital that meets your requirements.
This is a great analogy.
Right, as long as it meets the state's requirements. So parental choice means giving the parent the right to pick any school accredited by the state. Has to meet the requirements regarding math, English, history and science, art, music. So it has to be, and it can't teach certain things like violence and hatred and bomb making or anything of that sort, which would disqualify them from getting accredited by the state.
Hopefully.
So that's what parental choice in education means, and it's a term, by the way, that the United Nations adopted 60, 70 years ago. In 1948, the UN Declaration of Human Rights said this is the basic parental right to pick your child's school, to select the school that your child's going to attend.
I guess because in the U.S., the public school system has had a monopoly for so long that many people just assume the status quo is the way it always will be. You live in a certain neighborhood, your child either goes to the local public school, or if you can afford it, you send your child to the Catholic or the private school. But this is a growing movement now where, as you say, people would be able to use some of their tax dollars from their property taxes, which pay for the schools, to choose what school they want their child to go to. But I'm amazed sometimes in conversation with people, they're still unfamiliar with the concept, even though it's growing. What areas of the country are moving in this direction, and what have the results been so far?
Yeah, in the 20th century, there was practically no school choice at all. Starting in the 1990s, we started some school choice programs. Milwaukee was one of the biggest ones started in 1990. And it was started by a white conservative Republican governor, Tommy Thompson, who joined together with an African-American liberal Democrat assemblywoman, Polly Williams. And they put together the very first major school voucher program in the United States. And it was successfully introduced. It was opposed by the mayor, John Norquist. He opposed it. And what happened for the first 4 years, they took in kids, mostly minority children, going to Catholic schools in Milwaukee. And after 3 and 4 years, based on the test results, these kids were doing better than the kids who remained in the public schools. And then what they found out, 2 years after that, so by the 5th and 6th year, they saw the public schools' test results starting to improve. Why? Because of the competition, and the public schools didn't want to be embarrassed to see all their parents want to remove their kids. So every student benefited from this.
That's fantastic.
And the vouchers were less costly than the public school cost, so the taxpayers saved money. It was a win for everyone.
There's
and,
no negative.
And Mayor John Norquist did a complete about-face. He's now gung-ho in favor of school choice. He did a complete turnaround.
So Frank, we were, as you're discussing this, education is easily one of the single largest components of New York State's annual budget, with healthcare being a close second. Explain to the viewers tonight how the cost of education and healthcare are covered by taxpayers here in the state of New York.
How healthcare is covered, or
How education and healthcare, education first
education?
and foremost.
Okay. Well, education is covered by really two basic taxes. We get a little bit of federal aid, maybe 2% of the costs are covered by federal programs, but 98% or so is covered by state aid and property taxes. Before Patty mentioned the property taxes, that's the bulk of it. About 60% comes from property taxes statewide, and about 40% comes from state aid. I say property taxes, actually in New York City it's income taxes as well as property taxes. But the state also provides aid to all the school districts. They provide about 40%. And the state aid, though, goes in different amounts to different school districts. So some school districts might fund 90% of their budget by property taxes and 10% state aid. Other districts might fund 40% with property taxes and 60% from the state. So it's different amounts, but statewide it's 60% from property taxes, 40% from state aid.
So if New York State was to embrace school choice and embrace what we're proposing here tonight, explain to the viewers how providing parents with the right to choose a school for their kids, what the impact would be on local property taxes.
Oh, the impact over the long run would be really dramatic. In the short run, you wouldn't see it be gradual. The impact would be very gradual because you couldn't do this in 1 or 2 years. It would have to be phased in. But actually, a study was done for the New York State Senate 25 years ago, if you could believe this. And amazingly, a lot of people, 98% of the people are not familiar with this. Even most legislators are not familiar with it because they're younger. But a study was done for the New York State Senate at their request by Ron Lauder of Estee Lauder. Mm-hmm. He was asked to look at ways to help New York State because New York State was going into the tubes with deficits in their budgets. So he was looking at ways to privatize various programs that were funded by the state, whether it was bridges and tunnels or subways and railroads, various things. He wanted to look at all those approaches. And his conclusions were printed in all the newspapers of New York State, November 24th, 1991. That's the date that most of the papers printed all his findings in full page ads. New York Times, November 24th, 1991. And he summarized them. If you added up everything except education, look at that total, and then look at his recommendation on education, and his recommendation there was school choice. Give parents choice, but you fund the students who pick a non-public school at an amount obviously well below the public school average cost. The savings from school choice was more than twice as much as the total savings from everything else combined that he had.
Wow.
It was enormous. It was $4 billion per year back 25 years ago.
Right.
That would be saved with a parental choice system.
So you could double or triple that number easily.
I would say it would be 10 to 12 billion dollars a year annually in savings. I mean, some of the programs he suggested on transportation were sort of like one-time savings in a way. But if you looked at it on an annual basis, the educational savings to New Yorkers today would be in the order of 10 to 12 billion dollars a year with a full parental choice system. So it would be enormous, and that would help lower property tax. I mean, property taxes go up every year, as we all know, especially downstate New York, Long Island, and so forth. property taxes are 60%, most of the property taxes, 60 to 65% of school taxes, we would see that no more increases, and you would actually see reductions in school property taxes going out for, say, 5 years. You'd see reductions, no increases for the first few years, and then reductions.
But now, you're saying you would see the reductions because those gradual savings would start to be realized, but wouldn't there also be the potential that local school districts could take those savings somehow and try and reapply them to the point that they would not be seen by the home? I mean,
Some
I'm playing devil's
outrageous
advocate.
some outrageous school districts might do it, but again, the whole thing with school choice, the savings come because you're empowering certain middle-income students and low-income students whose parents want their children to go to a private school, a religious school, a Jewish school, Catholic school, Protestant school, and maybe they want their kids to say prayers, heaven forbid, at the beginning of the day. But the school must be accredited by the state, so it has to meet all the requirements educationally set up by the state for math, English, history, science, art, and music. Has to do all that. Now, if they want to add in a certain dress code or a certain behavior with regard to moral training for the students, that's up to the school and the parent to decide. So they'll do that. They don't get any extra money for that, obviously, but there's a huge savings, and that's where they'd see it. That's how they'd see it.
And it really underscores the fact that you don't need to spend a fortune for a child to get a better education, because we know statistically year after year the Catholic schools outperform the public schools at a much lower cost. So
And not only that, but New York spends the most of any state in the nation. We're at a little over 20,000 average per pupil. Long Island, we're over 25,000 average per pupil. The average for the nation is about 11,000. Alaska and I forget what other states are around 17,000, something in that area. We're the highest, and yet we come in the middle on the standardized test results, the NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. Those are the basic standard tests comparing different states. Our kids come in, on average, 20th to 30th. It hardly ever changes. And just the one other place that beats us in spending occasionally, it's not a state, it's Washington, D.C. They occasionally spend more than we spend, and guess what position they come in on the test
Last.
results? 51st.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not money.
Wow.
It's many other factors, and school choice is improving the quality of education in those states that are introducing it.
very impressive. Now, what are some of the other areas besides, I know you mentioned Milwaukee, so that's the longest term study, basically, of where this has been implemented. Where else have they had it for a number of years?
Well, Cleveland was one. That actually brought it to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they challenged it as to whether it would be permissible or violating the First Amendment, the religious freedom rights, and the court clearly decided it was permissible. Washington, D.C. has had a school choice program since 2004, and it was actually the Republican Congress that introduced choice for the poor parents of Washington, D.C., low-income parents, mostly minority parents. They loved it. The video showing the excitement when they have a lottery to see who's going to get into the private religious schools or private secular schools, and the black parents loved it. They love it. And then, lo and behold, and people don't know this, it was called the Opportunity Scholarship Program. It was stopped in 2009 by President Barack Obama, the first African-American president, because of the pressure he got from the Democrats in Congress who wanted to stop it. So they stopped it.
What was pressuring the Democrats to stop that? I mean, are you inferring that it's the teachers' unions who've been prominent supporters of Democrats for?
Well, that's what it is. The Democrats are beholden to the teacher unions. The teacher unions in the United States are the most powerful unions in the country. 3.5 million members. They want to keep their government monopoly. They don't want competition. They don't want to give choice. They don't like this at all. And it's not the teachers, it's the teacher unions. And I'm sort of looking at that as that's their job. They want to protect their monopoly. When I worked at AT&T, and they
You're
had the
familiar with
lawsuit
monopoly.
to break up we were the biggest company in the world, over 1 million employees. And I remember in the late 70s, my boss, a wonderful guy, and we were fighting a lawsuit in the Justice Department to break up the Bell system. And my boss said, Frank, get some studies to see if, I just been promoted to division manager, get some studies to show why we don't need competition in telecommunications. And he was an honest guy, and I thought he was kidding, but I had to do it. I spent 2 weeks looking for economic studies. They knew they'd get an honest answer from me, and 2 weeks later I went back to him. I said, Jim, I've done the work, I've researched it. I said, but in all honesty, competition is going to hurt AT&T, but it's going to benefit the consumer in an enormous way. They're going to get better service at a lower price. He laughed, he knew it, and we, of course, could have no studies to submit to the courts to argue our case, and then we broke up the Bell system. And the teachers are like that. They don't want any competition. They don't want to give choice. They want to protect their high-paying jobs.
Well, like you said, a lot of the individual teachers have no idea that the teachers' union, even if they're a member, they have no idea how liberal they are and that they're so opposed to school choice.
But you're also highlighting, though, the political pressures that even someone as powerful as the President of the United States, Barack Obama, would cave into
That's right.
this
Shocking.
craven political influence and work against the interest of the poor, of many, in many instances, minority families, whose best ticket, I mean, we've often heard it from very intelligent observers that the best ticket out of poverty is a great education.
That's right.
So if these families, these kids, these marvelous people get an opportunity in education, why would anyone, let alone the President of the United States, work against that interest?
It's crazy.
It seems pretty ridiculous.
We have, well, right now, over the past 25 years, more and more states are moving towards school choice. So about half the states now have some form of school choice. They've been moving in this direction. And there are some publications which I'd like to show you. This is called School Choice Yearbook for 2015-2016, put out by the American Federation of Children. And what it has is a listing of each of the 24 states that have school choice programs, and it details what the specifics are of each program, how many kids are in the schools, what how they get them, how they raise the money, and so forth, and how it benefits the students. There are two other publications. So American Federation of Children is one. This is the Friedman Foundation is a foundation established by Milton and Rose Friedman. Milton Friedman was the Nobel laureate winner of the economics prize back in the mid-70s, I think it was. And many people would argue, and I would agree, he was probably the nation's #1 economist for the 20th century.
Yes.
A genius, Milton Friedman. He and his wife both passed away, but they had the Friedman Foundation for school choice, and they come out with a lot of good studies and results. And a third publication is this put out by the Heartland Institute. Heartland Institute, and they have a number of publications, but the one I like best is the one on education. It's called School Reform News. It comes out every month, and they report on what's changing in all the states with regard to educational reform. And one of the major forms of educational reform is school choice. So
it is a growing movement.
it is a very seriously growing movement and dealing with a fundamental issue, dealing with parental rights.
One thing I think is interesting that you've cited is that in the inner city, sometimes people assume, well, the parents are busy or they're poor, or they're working 3 jobs and they don't really care, they're not really aware of education. But the fact is, when they're offered a choice of what to do with their property tax dollars, or like you said in Manhattan, income tax dollars, they prefer the private school, the Catholic school. They're aware that those schools do far better than their local public school. They just can't afford to send them there unless there's a voucher system instituted.
That's absolutely right. There was a great video done, a program, an hour-long program by Stossel, is it John
Stossel,
called Stupid in America. It's aired on TV, on I think ABC. It was an excellently done research program, and the scenes that I found most moving, exactly what you just said, Patty, is when they show these low-income parents, mostly minority parents, sitting in a huge auditorium, and there was a what do you call that?
A lottery.
Like a lottery and a drawing, because so many people wanted it. Maybe 5,000 people wanted the 1,000 seats that were offered in these charter schools or other charter schools basically. And when their name was called, or their number was called,
The sheer
ecstasy.
joy.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was
Wow.
beautiful seeing it. They wanted to get their kids because they weren't happy with their local public school. And they wanted to select a different school that would meet what they felt was the right approach dealing with their children's educational needs. And this charter program, the film showed how much these people wanted it. And it's just a shame that we don't have more of this choice. Again, and I'd want to include not only charter schools, but all private secular schools and private religious schools. The key condition would be, though, they never get as much money as the government schools. I would want to insist on that at least, and it'd be very low in the early years, maybe a quarter as much in the first 5 years. Eventually get it up to maybe half as much as the public schools get.
But as you point out, they spend far less per pupil.
They spend far less, exactly. And it will I'll tell you, it would also help the students who stay in the public schools. We saw that in Milwaukee.
Because those schools have to rise to the occasion.
Exactly.
Because of the competition.
For instance, very rarely do you have teachers that are compensated on a performance basis. I mean, a couple of schools are starting to do that, public schools. But if you introduced a bonus program for the better teachers rather than automatic step increases of 4% and just across-the-board increases with the contract, that doesn't motivate the teacher to perform better. Once they get tenure, they don't have to worry. But a bonus program where you get judgments from the administrators, from the parents, from other teachers. Teachers are honest people. And you judge then who are the best teachers and give them a bonus of $3,000 to the top 20%, $2,000 to the next 20%, and $1,000 for the next 20%. Then you're encouraging teachers to perform better. I mean, that's the way private industry works, and that's what improves the quality of work done. And just for the record, I should note, my mother and wife were public school teachers. My wife only taught a couple of years in New York City, public schools.
Full disclosure.
And my mother taught 17 years in St. Albans, Queens. And I have a daughter and two daughters-in-law who were teachers. So I love teachers. And I had two principals of public schools in the city who were wonderful people too, just for the record, that I knew very well. So they're wonderful people. And I don't even want to fault the union leaders. If I was the union leader, I'd probably be doing what their job is to keep their monopoly. But that's not what's right for the people. And whose job is it to do what's right for the people? It's the people elected by the people. The real culprits, the real problem is certain legislators in Albany and in other states where they're holding it up, in Congress, where these legislators are doing what they think the teacher unions want, so they'll get teacher union money, contributions.
But there's two things there, two issues there that you cited that I would flip around and ask for your thoughts. It is their right to advocate for their interests, financially, professionally. They have every right to do that. That is the right and the role of a union. But aren't we reaching a tipping point, or haven't we even surpassed that tipping point when, you look through Long Island here and Nassau and Suffolk County, the average property taxes are somewhere between $15,000, $25,000, and in some instances in the more affluent communities, $30,000 a year. And you can make a case now, just in the last couple of years, we read the reports where Catholic schools have had to close some of their parochial schools here in Long Island because they're no longer able to keep the enrollment with the flat economy and people not earning as much as they've earned in the past, with more competition in the private sector and people seeing their earnings going back to 1998 now, economically speaking, the pressures that are being put on the average consumer. At the same time, private schools are contracting in response to that. Wouldn't you be, to paraphrase it, wouldn't you think that the teachers' unions would see and acknowledge this and want to work to an optimal position on behalf of the taxpayers, knowing that they can only take them so far without breaking the golden goose, without cracking the environment that they operate in? You can't isolate them and say, well, we could pay our school teachers $300,000 a year. You can't, because at some point the costs become prohibitive. How many people are leaving the state of New York annually? How many people can really afford to retire in the state of New York anymore? I mean, you start to hit all those other issues, and don't they have a role in bringing some sense of balance to this perspective?
The teachers' unions are now facing in New York State problems because of the tax cap, and they're really very much opposed to the tax cap. The tax
cap was necessary.
Absolutely necessary, because property taxes, as you said, they're not. I think the average in New York State, in Long Island rather, probably about 12 to 14,000, I say, is the average property tax. And of that, about 2/3 almost is for school taxes.
Correct.
That's the bulk. And it's compared to, I have a lot of kids living in Virginia, Maryland, all their property taxes
Much
are
lower.
1/4. Yeah, they're 1/3 to 1/4 of our property taxes. Excellent schools, beautiful communities, because the school. I talked to another. I have other relatives of my daughters-in-law who were teachers in Virginia. They're making less than 60,000 after 20 years. Our teachers start
Wow.
at 65,000 in year one. They go to 130,000. Their pensions are 85,000. Again, wonderful people. Don't get me wrong. So I sort of disagree with you, Mike, because I could see a union leader. If I was a union, I'd want to keep the monopoly. That's my job, is to get as much for my union members. That's their job. I don't want to fault them on that. But it's totally immoral from the standpoint of what's right for the community. And the people culpable here are not so, the union leaders are doing their job. I don't want to fault them. The culpable people, in my view, are our state legislators who are stopping school choice and won't even allow a vote in the New York State legislature. They're stopping a vote, for Pete's sake.
But
Even
then
with
let-
the, sorry.
No,
go
sorry.
ahead. Even with the years of research now, like you said, Milwaukee and Washington, D.C., showing overwhelming proof that it's across the board benefits.
Everyone
in
know-
the education
yeah,
of the
the res-
students, the graduation rates, the SAT scores, going on to college, the reading levels. The dropout rate is completely different in a private school versus a public
Absolutely.
school. And a lot of parents want some self-discipline instilled. They want
Absolutely.
patriotism. They don't want the anti-American garbage that they get in a lot of the public schools.
And I don't even want to say, it should be up to the parent to decide. That's the key. The test results are clearly showing that these private schools who take kids via lottery, most of the time when it's a charter school, if it's the other private schools, their graduation rates are like 99%. Their college rates, 90% plus. These are kids who are coming from low-income backgrounds. And in the charter schools, the same results. They're taking kids by lottery, and their results are much better than the ordinary public schools. So it's a win, and they do it for lower. They get maybe 80 to 90% of the cost of the public school, whereas like the Catholic schools, the elementary school cost is like $5,000. High school might be say $6,000 even elementary, $10,000 for high school, Catholic high school, average about $7,000. But the public school cost is about $21,000 now in New York State. Take out the special needs and you're still at about $18,000. So it's a huge savings if you could give some assistance to low and middle income parents to pick a school that they want for their kids for educational reasons primarily, but also there are many parents who want different dress codes, who want different sets of moral values taught their kids regarding sexual behavior. They don't want their kids to be given a condom or a contraceptive at the school, at the high school. Some parents want that, fine, then you pick the public school. But if you don't want it, you should be able to pick a private school that meets your requirements. This is a basic parental right. Like I said, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Basic parental right is to choose your child's education. The Catholic Church has talked about this in Familiaris Consortio. It's the most fundamental parental right to pick your child's education. Yet you can't do it today because you can't afford it, as Patty said. They can't afford this. And we've got to do something in New York, but the legislators have stopped this now for many, many years.
Now name names, because we've had changes in leadership in New York State. Sheldon Silver was the Speaker of the Assembly, and he's now being found guilty of corruption charges and is in prison, facing prison. Senator Skelos has been charged with corruption as it relates to involvement with his son, so he's now been displaced from the New York State Senate as the majority leader. Name names. Who are some of the people that are objecting to school choice?
Okay, and just,
Just so our viewers can know where
Right.
people stand.
well, what's happened in New York State now from 2011, I think, on, for about four years in a row, maybe 2012, and 4 years in a row, including 2016, just about every year, the New York State Senate has voted on this bill, which would provide a tax credit for people who donate money to a scholarship foundation to help low and middle income kids go to a private school. By the way, it also gives a tax credit, a huge tax credit, I think it's 75% tax credit, for donations to public schools. They put a limit at, I think it was 150 million. And these donations then would help public schools, half of it, Half of it helps low middle income kids get scholarships to go to a private school. And as kids then go to the private school and leave the public school, there's a tremendous savings to the taxpayers, which more than offsets the tax loss that the state has from giving these tax credits out. The Senate has passed it now 4 times in a row. These are Republican-controlled state Senate, passed it overwhelmingly. 80-90% of the Senate is voting for it. In the Assembly, there were times when we had over 100 of the 150 assemblymen co-sponsoring the bill, including Carl Hastie, the current Democratic leader, one of the co-sponsors, supporting it. I would say about almost all the Republicans were co-sponsoring it, say 40 of them. Then maybe they had, say, 60 of the, or 50, say 50 of the, how many, 105 Democrats in the Assembly co-sponsoring it. But the way it works in the Assembly, Silver did this and Hastie, you have to have, forget the Republicans, you just look at the Democrats, you need a majority of them to approve allowing a vote.
A majority of the Democratic
Democrats,
majority.
That's right. So
And they
you-
have over 100 seats of
They have
the
about
150.
105 seats, so they need 55 or so of these. They had maybe 45. So they would, for 4 years in a row, they would not allow a vote. Carl Hastie, who was one of the co-sponsors, or one of the sponsors of this bill, he's now the leader. He would not allow a vote.
So Carl Hastie, who was an assemblyman, who now is the Speaker of the Assembly, having succeeded Sheldon Silver, you're saying now he has either reversed his position or he is no longer...
He's unable, because of the way the Democrats are operating in the Assembly, and because they get so much money, I think several millions of dollars from the teacher unions,
And
who are the
political
most
donations.
powerful union in the state, and the teacher unions want no competition. They don't want school choice. The Democrats are terrified, and they put the interests of these teacher unions up here, and they put the interests of the poor down here.
Right, but
And this is mind-boggling. In other words, the poor are being hurt, as well as the taxpayers being hurt, because the Democrats in the Assembly are putting the teacher union interests at the top. And this is totally, not totally, it's unknown by the overwhelming majority of voters in New York State. They do not know it. And it's especially unknown to the minority voters. They have no idea which party is stopping that. And I've just got to tell you how, when I used to get calls from the high school I went to, Bishop Loughlin High School in Brooklyn, and it was white then in the 50s. Now it's minority, 95% minority. Get calls from African American women asking for donations, which I make to my high school, Bishop Loughlin. And when I tell them that they got to contact their Democrat assembly person to push them to allow this come up for a vote, they think I was lying or crazy. That was the way they reacted. They could not believe that the Democrat Assembly people were holding up this bill, because the Democrats,
They claim to be for the poor.
The
And
party
this
of the
is-
poor.
When this
How
is
could this be?
explained to the
Exactly.
average person, it's a no-brainer.
I've asked so many people, sharp people, literally almost 100 people, including high school students that were brilliant. When I explain what party opposes it, they had no idea. When I tell them it's the Democrat Party, then I'm saying, why do you think the Democrat Party opposes school choice? Honestly, not one of them could figure it out. I've asked other ordinary people who are not, in tune with what's really happening, but ordinary, intelligent people. Very few, less than 10%, had any idea that it was fear of the teacher unions. They did not know what was holding it up, and they just couldn't believe it. And then, that school choice would benefit the poor, benefit the taxpayer, and yet the Democrats won't allow a vote.
And yet I think, it's healthy to remind our viewers that I believe New York State has about 400,000 kids, students, who are receiving an education either through private or religious schools. And the savings to New York State, because the costs are so much lower for educating them there, that since the state foregoes having to build additional public school facilities, hiring additional teachers, it's close to $10 billion a year.
No, I'd say, well, it depends. It depends.
8 to 10 billion, 8 to 10
if you
billion,
use the
I've
full
read.
cost, yeah.
Still significant savings for all the taxpayers, and I sometimes think that they don't realize that. And now what you're inferring is that we actually have constituencies, people, who are voting against their own interest in some respects. Well, full disclosure, I'm a registered Republican. I don't see this in a partisan tone. I see this really, we should be voting as residents and taxpayers in New York State for our interest. And if it's, whether you're poor, whether you're middle class, whatever your background and station in life is, if you want to educate your child, you should have this opportunity. And it's clear you're making a very strong case for school choice.
And I should mention too, we've invited some Democrat Assembly people onto the program for this program. We gave them a good month's notice. Assemblyman Philip Ramos in Suffolk, Assemblywoman Earlene Hooper in Hempstead, Assemblywoman Catherine Nolan.
This is a big issue in
New York
Hempstead, by the
City.
way.
I know, and I've invited them all on because I wanted to give them a chance to explain their position. Earlene Hooper and many of the Democrats, I'd say a good half dozen that I saw, had literature that they mailed out to people, their voters, saying that this bill, it was A2551 in the Assembly, it was S 1976 in the Senate, this is for the year 2015, 2016. They said this bill would benefit the wealthy. Those were the three key words they used, benefit the wealthy.
How can they claim that? It's
They
the
said
exact
this,
opposite.
Earlene Hooper, over and over, and she said it several times in the letter. So I even called 6 or 7 of the staff, the offices of these assembly people, spoke to the staff people. I never got to the actual assembly person. Got to most of the time, they're key staff people. And I say, you got to explain this to me. What do you mean by benefiting the wealthy? All it does, this bill, is encourages a wealthy person to donate $100,000 to a scholarship fund for the public schools or the private schools, get back $75,000, but they're still giving away $25,000. They don't win. It's not for their kids. They can't use it for their kids. This has to go to a scholarship fund for other kids, poor kids, or for a public school. How is it benefiting them? I could honestly see they believed the crap that their boss was putting on these material.
Right.
They did not understand it. I think they couldn't believe what I was telling them. Then when I called them back again, I could see there was uncomfortable feelings. I don't even know that they agreed with their boss.
So
what their boss was
would I be
doing.
fair to say political dishonesty?
It is great political dishonesty.
Self-serving
It's-
political dishonesty.
It is deception of the worst sort. To say this bill is going to benefit the wealthy,
They can't be unaware
no,
that
they're
that's
doing it because they don't know how to.
dishonest.
They don't want. I'll tell you, this is something I learned too, and I didn't know this 10 years ago. 5 years ago, I found these Democrat Assembly people throughout the state, not all of them, but by the way, Governor Cuomo, a Democrat, supported this.
Correct.
He put it in his budget, and I'd say a good third or a quarter of the Democrats support this. A third of them, I think even more, really support it in their hearts, but they're terrified of the teacher unions. And their big concern is they do not want the voters to know this. They don't want the poor, black, white, Hispanic voters who vote 90% for them, the Democrats, the party of the poor. They don't want them to know that it's the Democrats stopping school choice for them so they can pick a better school
It's
for their kids.
unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
And it's so crucial right now in our society because, as you say, it wouldn't just be the immediate benefit, but the benefit of children that come out of school
Right.
better prepared for a job because they graduated, first of all. They can read better. They have better self-discipline.
Exactly.
Young adults that have more of a patriotism in them rather than the hate America stuff that they're
But
getting.
I'd like to pick up on that, which is, it is so important for our children to get a good education as we prepare to leave the workforce at some point in the future. These children must come in with the skill sets that are current and are capable of entering the workforce and becoming healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, firefighters, array of jobs. And in order to do that, you need to be well educated. And we're living in a time when technological change has never been greater. And we do our kids a disservice. We do our society a disservice by not giving them the tools to compete and prepare.
Keep in mind too, some people who are bigoted think that the minority kids and poor white kids want preferential treatment, affirmative action. They want special treatment to get a job, and
No.
it's not what they want. They want equal opportunity at education so that they're going to be the better and well-qualified persons
Frank,
for
I
the job.
couldn't agree with you more. The three
This
of us
is what
sitting here.
they want that, but what they don't know, what these poor, low-income voters don't know, is which party is holding up school choice. It's the Democratic Party. It is mind-boggling. And also another group that is pretty ignorant on this. I mean, the average middle-income white voter who thinks, oh my goodness, school choice, that's going to help that's going to cost me money because now I got to pay for these kids going to the Protestant, Jewish, Catholic school.
It doesn't work like that.
Well, it'll pay for the kids that are
Well,
in there
what
already.
you're addressing is-
Eventually, you have to phase this in a gradual
No,
way.
but what you're addressing
the savings
also-
come from kids leaving the public schools and transferring to the private schools. Initially, it would be probably 1/5 the cost. Eventually, it would get up to 1/2 the cost.
But address that question, because people have, again, mischaracterized this. They'll say that, okay, a parent chooses a religious school, then this means that the state is funding religion.
Oh, big argument. And again, a lot of certain bigoted people say that. It's not the case. It's just like I
It's
said with,
such a distortion.
if you get a Social Security check, you paid into Social Security, you get a Social Security check, heaven forbid, are they going to, they say that if you get this money from Social Security and you put it into the church collection box, that government money is funding religion? No, it's the
course
person
not.
has the right to that money, makes a decision what to do
Well,
with
I
it.
like the parallel you made earlier about healthcare. When you
Healthcare,
get your
you
money,
pick a
you pick and
Jewish
choose your
hospital, a Catholic
That's
hospital,
right.
you can
You
do
want to go to
whatever.
Long Island Jewish now,
That's right.
Northwell?
A voodoo doctor.
You're paying, now people pay income taxes, they pay property taxes. Why should they not have the right to pick any school they want, as long as, must be clear, the school
accredited.
must be accredited by the state. It can't just be any dinky little group of people that call it a school. It's got to be a school that meets the state's requirements on the educational subjects that the state wants the kids to be taught. And another big difference today, which didn't exist 50 years ago. 50 years ago, the values being taught in public schools were quite different than they are today. I don't want to get into all the specifics, but dress codes. Parents should be able to pick a school that has the kind of dress code they want. If they want a prayer set at the beginning of the day, at grace before meals, I don't give them any extra money for that, but they should be able to pick a school that does that. If they don't want it, you pick the government school, the public school.
There's just no other area of society where there's no competition.
That's right.
As in
Education is
public
the last
education.
great, and this unnatural monopoly. That's another thing. Some professor from Hofstra once questioned me on when I described this as the last great unnatural monopoly. He says, "What is Rousseau talking about with unnatural? What is an unnatural?" This is a professor of education at Hofstra. I said, "This guy's serious?" I don't know if I tried to call him or not. There's a term. I was in charge of a lot of economic issues at AT&T. I was director of costing and pricing and so forth. But I think these are basic terms. A natural monopoly is something like the delivery of water to your home, or natural gas delivery, or electricity. You don't want two pipes coming with water or gas. That's a natural monopoly. The cost would be prohibitive to everybody if you had a competition in providing pipes to a given neighborhood. That's a natural monopoly. An unnatural monopoly is where the people benefit by competition. So this is an unnatural monopoly, just as AT&T was when I was asked by my boss, "Frank, we don't need, show why we don't need competition." That was crazy. It was an unnatural monopoly. We had
Forced.
85%
It's
control of
forced.
all the phones. We didn't deserve the monopoly any longer. When we had telephone lines going to the homes, yes, but then we were getting to cell towers and things were changing. So now the same thing for education. It's the last great unnatural monopoly that's hurting the taxpayers enormously, especially on Long Island, and hurting even more seriously the low-income and middle-income students, not only in their educational quality, but in their values that they're being taught.
So that begs the question, if low-income voters, especially minority voters, want school choice, and Democrats oppose it in the state of New York, why do most low-income voters vote for Democrats who are stopping school choice and keeping this from their constituents?
The reason is, as I suggested before, the overwhelming majority of minority voters who want school choice, by the way, all polls show this, more than the white voters. They want school choice more than the white voters. They have no idea it's the Democrat Party stopping school choice. They can't fathom it. They do not know.
And just to be fair, Governor Cuomo has supported.
Oh yeah, and a third of the assemblymen
He's a
for it.
Democrat. He's in a
And
second
Governor
term.
Cuomo supported this, but they didn't. At the end result, when the head of the Republican Party,
John Flanagan from Suffolk
gets
County.
in with Carl Hastie, the Democratic leader in the Assembly, and Governor Cuomo, and they're going to give in on whatever it is, rent control or minimum wage, various things. They didn't insist. Cuomo and Flanagan failed to insist on including this education tax credit bill, which would have been just a foot in the door, not a big thing. It was a foot in the door to encourage people to donate money to scholarship funds for private schools, to public schools funds as well, and get 75% tax credit. So you'd see a lot of donations. They put a limit on it. Everyone wins. It would cause some kids to shift to the private schools, save the taxpayers enormous amounts because the private schools do it at a fraction of the cost, and yet it didn't happen. And sadly, and I don't understand this, I don't want to say the Republicans are stupid, but why aren't they making this a big issue? If I was trying to advocate for the Republican Party on advertisements on TV, this would be the #1 issue I'd be putting on TV. Why? Because it's the biggest issue about which there's total ignorance, not total, but near total ignorance. People understand the differences between the two parties on tax issues, on foreign policies, on trade issues. They understand that. On other moral issues, but on school choice, there's the total misunderstanding. The minority voters they think the Democrats want to help them. They don't know the Democrats are screwing them by opposing school choice because they put the teacher union interest above it. And what gets me is, why aren't the Republicans informing the minority voters?
Highlighting it more,
Yes,
bringing more
let 'em
attention
know,
to it.
so that minority voters can consider this when they're voting. I mean, it's going to stay like this until the minority voters and the poor white voters find out which party is holding up school choice. It's the biggest issue about which there's misunderstanding on the part of voters. And it's the biggest issue that would benefit taxpayers as well. Benefit poor kids, better educational quality, better moral values.
Benefits the country.
Benefits
Right.
the parents, they get the values that they want taught to their kids, better education, and saves the taxpayers billions of dollars in our state alone. It's
When you explain it to somebody,
it's a
you
no-brainer.
can explain
It
it
is.
in 5
That's
minutes.
why I wanted
they
these
get
Democrats
it.
on.
It's overwhelming.
I wanted to get, so I think I called seven of them at different times. I've tried to get them on the show because I want to ask them in front of a camera, what is your reason for opposing this? If they try to say benefit the wealthy, they're going to look like dumbasses. They're not going to say it. I mean, I'll point out what the heck they're talking about.
There's
So
only one answer. It's obvious. They're
they don't want to
protecting
come on. They
the
want
teacher
to,
unions.
and they want to keep the people ignorant of the fact they're opposing it. And the Republicans, again, I don't know. Maybe I don't know why they're not informing people of this.
Where are the presidential candidates on this issue?
Okay. And it looks like we're going to have Trump and Hillary Clinton, unless something happens with Hillary being indicted or something. And even if it were Bernie Sanders, pretty much, I'd say every Republican candidate was leaning towards pro-school choice. Of the 17 of them from the start, Trump is the one I know least about, but of the other 16 for sure, all pro-school choice. I don't know where Trump is. I'm assuming he would be for school choice, being a businessman and so forth. The two Democrats, now this is something, and they talk about it in different news stories. Hillary and Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist, he obviously is totally, he wants government control of everything, Bernie Sanders. I don't think he's going to get the nomination. Hillary Clinton, though, because she has the endorsements of the two major national unions,
Oh, yeah.
Teachers union.
teacher unions, the NEA, National Educational Association, AFT, American Federation of Teachers, 3 million plus members. They don't want school choice. They want to keep their monopoly. They've endorsed her over a year ago. She, in her heart, I think she might even be for it a bit, going back 40 years in her life. But now,
She's
she
not
wouldn't
gonna
dare.
waver.
Right, she would never do it because she kowtows to the teacher unions. And she doesn't even want this issue discussed. She doesn't, and the media people in these debates, they don't bring up this issue.
She doesn't want the Democratic voters to be made aware
That
of
she's stopping school choice.
what it really
She's opposed
is.
to it. Yeah. And by the way, the federal government could get involved with this issue by providing tax credits at the federal level for certain expenditures that a person makes for tuition for K to 12. Chuck Schumer, for example, came out with a bill for college tax credits. He wanted to give a tax credit for make.
But only for colleges, not for.
I wrote him twice. I wrote him first. I said, "How about adding K to 12?" He didn't give me a nonsense answer. I wrote him back a second time on it. You know, Mr. Schumer, come on, you didn't answer my question. I want to know, why wouldn't you extend this K to 12, help low income, and put an income test on it? You have to make income below certain amounts
Sure.
to help low middle income parents, not wealthy people, to get a tax credit if they're paying tuition.
Right, cap the income and then index
Exactly,
it for inflation.
exactly, and make it. You get a higher percentage back and a higher amount below your income. No, he doesn't want to get into it because he too. The Democrats are not just about all of them totally controlled by the teacher unions.
It's amazing.
It is
It's
amazing.
absolutely amazing. It's frightening. We only have a couple of minutes in the show, Frank, but try and help our viewers understand who are the real winners with school choice and who are the real losers.
And it really should be a pretty obvious thing to most people. And again, I've been talking to so many people about this. That's where I was ignorant. I thought
Well, this has
people
become a
understood
passionate.
It is the big. I'm involved with so many issues. I don't want to get into a lot of different financial issues, economic issues, foreign policy issues. I get involved with a lot of these things. But there's, at least there, most people understand where the political parties are, you know. But on this issue, there's a total lack, not a total, but the biggest lack of understanding on the part of voters as to what the consequences of school choice are, that improves quality of education for everybody, not just the kids who go to the private schools, but the kids who stay in the public schools, because those teachers suddenly are going to be under pressure to improve, and the administrations of public schools are going to have to set up a system where they keep the better teachers and let the poor teachers go. Otherwise, they're going to harm the quality of education and lose more customers. So everybody wins, the students who are opted out to go to the private schools and the public school students. In addition, the taxpayers win enormously. New York State would be the biggest winning state because we have the highest public school costs. And on the private school side, just for the record, the Catholic school tuitions in New York State, believe it or not, are not higher than most other states. So
Correct.
that's kind of the same. But the public school costs are much higher. We're twice the national average in New York.
And that would take some pressure off families, for example,
yes.
where the mom would like to be home with the kids, but she's forced to go out to a second job to pay the property taxes.
Right.
So
everyone wins. The property tax winners, income taxes will go. Well, it won't lower income taxes in New York State because we have a deficit and a debt, but it will lower our debt, on our state debt, and enable us to do other good things. The infrastructure problems that we want to deal with, this will give us money to deal with infrastructure
You
problems.
bring that up, and a perfect example is that while this, so just to talk briefly about the financial aspects of this, the state has actually reduced its overall amount of debt over the last couple of years, but at the same time, debt that's being issued by all of these other relative agencies
Right.
that answer to the state has
Growing.
exploded.
Right.
And a perfect example is they're rebuilding the Tappan Zee Bridge, and I believe the cost of that is going to be somewhere between $7 and $9 billion. And the governor had to be really creative, Governor Cuomo, in terms of trying to find that money. And yet what you're talking about here is a perfect example of how the issue on school choice has the potential to furnish the state with billions of dollars initially.
Ron Lauder,
Year after year.
based on his study, $8 to $12 billion.
It frees up money that could get
They
invested.
could pay for that,
Correct.
that bridge work, the Tappan
But that's,
Zee Bridge,
we all
in
know
1
that
year.
that's not the only bridge that's going to need to be
No,
rebuilt.
that's right. But the savings are enormous. There's no question about it. The savings would be low in the early years. You'd have to phase it in. Like the tax credit would be low for the first year. You maybe only get $500,000, and you put the low income limit on who qualifies. Then you keep raising it, so you get more and more kids. So you phase this thing in, so that in every year the state benefits and saves money. And when it's fully implemented, based on Ron Lauder's study, which would probably take 5 to 10 years, you would see annual savings in the $10 to $12 billion per year for New York State
it's
alone.
really hypocritical of the Democrats to claim to be for the poor while they're suppressing this issue. In the same way that it's actually hypocritical for the teachers' unions to say that they are for the best education when they see what the scores and the results are every year, graduation, going on to high school, SAT, reading scores, math scores. Even for them to say that they're for the best education while they're suppressing school choice, it's hypocritical.
And I remember there were some studies for New York City teachers, a very high percentage were sending of the public school teachers in the city were sending their kids to private religious schools.
Right. But what I was going to add is, so when you look at this issue, as we've discussed it now, in isolation, you can make this case, a very strong case for the benefits of school choice. The benefits are enormous. But when you look at it as just a composite, as a part of all the other aspects of New York, Governor Cuomo has announced very ambitious plans for rebuilding transportation and infrastructure, most notably his plan to rebuild LaGuardia Airport, his plan to rebuild and add a third rail to the Long Island Railroad, to rebuild Penn Station. The cost of this proposal are in the billions, multiples, and yet what you're proposing here, if you were to tie school choice to other bills, add it in as part of other legislation, you are actually giving people an opportunity here to collect money and revenue that would support these other projects that are a benefit to the state.
Say the savings were $10 billion. Again, it would take a
Right.
number of 5 years at least to reach it. Say the savings were $10 billion a year. You could give $2 billion of that to the public schools, back to
Correct.
the public schools. put $4 billion of the remaining
Rebuild
into
public schools.
infrastructure.
There's public schools that are falling down.
So
need to be
you could give
rebuilt.
extra money to the public schools,
Technology,
for
investments.
infrastructure, and the rest could go towards keeping other state programs going and well paid for
All
without
positive
borrowing.
repercussions.
Everybody would win. It's a win for everyone. Again, the teachers would be under pressure to perform better, or they don't get any salary increases, or don't get their high pay increases and so forth. So there'll be pressure on the public school teachers. I agree with that. But that's good for the children. That would be beneficial to improving the quality of education.
No,
across the board.
I think it's a very impressive issue. It's misunderstood in large part by the public. I think you've done a great job tonight educating our viewers in terms of where the issue really stands, and what, just in the last minute or two that we have, what do you recommend our viewers do? Who should they write to? Who should they contact?
Viewers should be informing their relatives and friends and contacting their Democrat assemblyman, this is in New York State, and finding out what they're going to do to allow a vote in the New York State Assembly on this education tax credit bill, which has been proposed for the last 4 years, and which the Democrats will not even allow a vote in the Assembly. It passed the Senate overwhelmingly 4 times in a row. The Democrats will not even allow a vote in the Assembly. Contact your assemblyman, put pressure on him or her to allow a vote and to co-sponsor this bill.
Very good. And then Carl Heastie, have you spoken to the new speaker? You've tried to contact him?
I tried to contact him to invite him, but I never got through really.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there, Frank. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patty. Thank you to our viewers for watching tonight. You've been watching the American Family Association Presents. Our topic tonight is who's stopping school choice in New York and why. Our guest tonight was Frank Russo, co-host Patty Knapp. I'm Michael Mulhall. Thank you very much for tuning in and being with us tonight. We look forward to seeing you next week, and good night.
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, a lot of,
A lot of stuff.
yeah, it's good.
After 1973, about 30% of your friends and relatives are missing. Since the Supreme Court approved legal abortions 30 years ago, nearly 1 of every 3 babies was aborted. That means 43 million U.S. children, teens, and young adults are missing. While we know how all of them disappeared, we will never know what they had to offer. Life. See what we've been missing.
Over the years, humanity has made terrible mistakes. People were treated as less than human, even killed, because they were a different skin color, because they were a different faith, because they were unplanned, unknown, and helpless. But over time, we are slowly learning that we are all God's children, created in His image, and to disregard the value of human life, whether through hate or indifference, is wrong. That all human creation, regardless of race, religion, abilities, or stage of human life, has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a right to love and be loved. As Americans, let's cherish the sanctity of life, because we know how it feels when others treat us as less than human.
I wish I had known. Nobody told me that 40 years of research and 28 medical studies have shown a significant link between abortion and breast cancer. I didn't know abortion could increase my risk of breast cancer by 50% or more. Now, I've got breast cancer and learned the abortion I had when I was 17 was a major risk factor. I want to let other women know because I would give anything to have known. Whether you're pregnant or had an abortion, learn the facts today.